Audi may have had a solid start to its Formula 1 adventure, but its biggest weakness has already got it eyeing a new engine concept. Point-scoring debut for the German manufacturer in Australia, as Gabriele Bortoleto finished in 9th place, surpassed an initial target it set of just getting to the checkered flag. Since then, it has shown that when things are working well, it can fight for points at the front end of the midfield. But the start of the year has not been without its challenges, and Audi has had to address a few niggles along the way. There have been reliability dramas, which caused non-starts for Nico Hülkenberg at the Australian Grand Prix and for Bortoleto in China. Plus, its race starts have been among the worst in the field, with both drivers losing a load of positions away from the grid over the opening 3 races. Audi is certainly not shying away from the fact that the biggest deficit to the front is with its power unit, but most interestingly, it thinks that the progress it needs to make in this area will not be achieved through simple upgrades. Instead, it's already looking towards a new engine concept, either for 2027 or 28, to address some fundamental design elements. Audi estimates that the gap it has to F1 pace setter Mercedes is around 1.5 seconds. While some of that will undoubtedly be down to the chassis, it acknowledges that most of this deficit to the front comes from the engine. Audi F1 project leader Mattia Binotto says there is no escaping that if you're down on power in F1, then that requires more battery deployment to be used to get up to top speed on the straights, and that has consequences. But it would be too simplistic to conclude that Audi's gap to the front is simply a case of it lacking horsepower. Audi's situation is more nuanced than that, and, as Binotto told the race, it is a combination of power, energy deployment, how efficient you are, and drivability. The current generation of cars have shown that the final lap time is the result of a host of factors in the package coming together: minimum speeds through corners, effectiveness of energy harvesting, and deployment patterns on the straights. Engine drivability is also really important, with Audi talking about the characteristics of its engine being that it's quite peaky, which can make things more difficult for drivers to manage. Taming a tricky handling car on this front can be made easier on sticky tyres in qualifying, but weaknesses here can get exposed in the races once the rubber starts wearing away. This is one of the reasons why Bortoleto and Hülkenberg can have impressive qualifying performances but face more challenging times on Sundays. Another area that needs addressing is what Audi says are consequences from harsh gear changes. Binotto has explained that this is making things more challenging for the drivers under acceleration because, when they get on the power, things are more on the edge and that can cost lap time. But it's potentially even worse under braking because when the drivers face more aggressive downshifts, then it can make the car unstable. That can manifest itself in the rear end of the car getting a bit loose on corner entry, which saps driver confidence. Added together, these two elements can then make it very difficult to balance the cars. And that situation gets even worse in the races because, as the rear of the car moves around and the tyres take more punishment, it can mean the rubber overheats and its wear increases. Throw all those power unit elements together, and Binotto reckons that 2/3 of the gap that Audi has to the front comes from the power unit. Beyond performance when the car is up to speed, one of the most publicly obvious areas for improvement is, as mentioned before, the race starts. Of the 6 times that Audi's actually been there when the lights have gone out, taking into account those did not starts in Australia and China, only once did either driver in the first lap further up than where they started. That same race featured Audi's worst getaway, as Hülkenberg lost 9 places to prove the problem is very much car related rather than limited to an individual driver not getting on top of things. Some of Audi's headaches can be resolved by software calibration, which can help with its harvesting and deployment strategies to better manage energy over a lap, but not all of it can be cured that way. For example, the race starts are understood to be a consequence of Audi having what some believe is the biggest turbo on the grid. The size of the turbo contributes an awful lot to how good each team's getaway is. Ferrari is said to be so good at its getaways because it has one of the smallest turbos in the field. The smaller turbo means there is less mass and lower inertia needed to spool it up, and therefore it's much easier to get it into the right RPM window. At the other end of the spectrum, the large size of Audi's turbo makes it harder for drivers to hit the perfect sweet spot in spinning it up, and then keep it in the right window before the lights go out. With the size of the turbo a central part of the power unit concept, making a change on this front to help the starts is not something that can be done overnight. That is why both drivers and Binotto have talked of it being a long-term effort to get fully on top of. In terms of improving the overall power of the Audi engine, there is some scope for hardware improvements over the remainder of 2026. Audi's deficit to the front means it's almost certain to get granted some extra development chances this season and beyond. Under F1's new additional development and upgrade opportunities, if a manufacturer is deemed to have an engine that is more than 2% adrift of the benchmark at a set point, then they'll be allowed to make one upgrade for 26 and another for 2027. If the deficit is 4% or more, then they'll be allowed to make 2 upgrades for this season and 2 more the following campaign. The first call by the FIA in granting allowances is set to be made after the Miami Grand Prix, with it anticipated that the analysis will be completed in time for Monaco in June, opening the door for improvements thereafter. The possibility for those manufacturers on the back foot to be able to make in-season developments should allow them to close the gap to the front, which would be good news for Audi. But while the rules could open the allowance for some extra in-season development, Audi does not think that changes it can make in the short term are what it needs to get to the front over the long haul. And that is why it thinks, as Binotto told the race, its best solution could well be heading down a different concept, even if that will take until 2027 or 2028 to come into play. The new concept will almost certainly be focused on addressing the power unit characteristics that are not perfect this year, which includes the drivability, the peaky power, and those difficult starts. An obvious starting point for a major design rethink would be turbo size. Not having a new design ready until 2028, rather than fast-tracking changes through as quickly as possible, seems an awfully long time to wait. But it needs to be put into the context of what Audi's big master plan is, and the single key target it has laid out. And that is to be able to win the World Championship by 2030. In fact, it has officially labelled this Mission 2030, and was open at its pre-season launch about the ambition. To be able to do that, the team needs everything lined up, and to be hitting its peak at the same time, so it cannot rush through an engine revamp if it's not making sure that its car and infrastructure are up to standard to make the most of it. Binotto himself says, we need to be patient. Hence the thoughts of making some bigger changes over the next 2 years, but this does not mean it's giving up on good results now. Audi certainly wasted little time in getting a reorganisation sorted following the surprise departure of team principal Jonathan Wheatley after the Chinese Grand Prix. With Binotto clear he needed someone else alongside him to help fill in management gaps on race weekends, Audi appointed Alan McNish to be its new racing director. Longtime Audi man McNish, former team boss of its Formula E team, will have oversight of sporting matters, engineering coordination, driver management, race strategy and garage operations, as well as deal with on-track media and partner activities. This will leave Binotto clear to focus on the bigger picture stuff and balance out long-term ambitions versus short-term priorities. Audi certainly has plenty of work to do in terms of getting on top of its reliability niggles, which are different problems each time. So while this situation highlights that it is addressing issues as they come up because they're not repeating, equally it shows that there is still plenty of room for improvement with an immature organisation to get itself into a place where it can run trouble-free. It well knows that the limited mileage completed means it's not gathering valuable experience that can improve its performance. But if there's one thing that Binotto will not allow, it is in letting short-term distractions cost it in being able to deliver on that long-term objective, Mission 2030. It means being clever for now with how it deploys resources in a cost-cap environment and thinking bigger picture about what's best to tick the right boxes for the future rather than throwing everything at it now. As Binotto said, I will not compromise the future for the short term.